Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to today's event. We are going to get started here. My name is Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and I am pleased to welcome Chris Harley from DATABASICS to today's event, all about the need for third-party time and expense. As we get started, please do know that we do want your questions and input during today's event. You can enter that on the right part of the WebEx window here. You look for the Q&A block, and just feel free to enter your questions at any point. I know Chris will be leaving time for those. We are also recording today's event, and without any further delay, I'm going to, I think, hand things over to Chris to get us started. So, Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you, MS Dynamics World, for having us share this morning, really looking at kind of trends in third-party time and expense solutions. I was looking to take hopefully somewhere around 45 minutes or so today, so hopefully not too long this morning, and really, wanting to cover a number of different topics. Again, for a quick introduction from my side, I'm Chris Harley with DATABASICS. I head up the sales and channels here at DATABASICS. I've spent about 17 years within the time and expense industry here at DATABASICS, so certainly have seen a lot change as it relates to what's taking place in the time and expense marketplace. As far as kind of the three statements we looked at when we put together this webinar, we were certainly first and foremost looking at technology and how that's changing. The second thing we were looking at is current expectations as it relates to time and expense solutions. And the third area is looking at really what the impact of these expectations are on the overall workforce. Now, with all that being said, the focus today, of course, is looking at how this relates to a dynamics environment as it relates to the accounting side of the organization. And really, as you look at dynamics here, we're really talking across all platforms out there. So regardless of what someone may be using on the back end, we do integrate and work with the entire suite of Microsoft Dynamics products here. So I'll be using kind of Dynamics generically. We'll look at some things that may be specific to different platforms out there, but if there's any questions you guys have, we certainly can address those as we get into that. So with that, let's kind of talk about the agenda I was going to cover here. For those of you that aren't familiar with DATABASICS, I was going to spend a minute and just give you a quick overview as far as who we are, how we fit into the larger time and expense marketplace. Then what I wanted to do is look at where time and expense solutions have been and where they're going here within the future, because again, as technology changes, it certainly does change how these platforms operate and what the solutions are and how they may impact the users out there. Certainly then want to look at, of course, at how those trends, how those impact the overall value offering. As it relates to Dynamics, again, our focus here today is talking about third-party systems and what you should expect and how the integration should take place. We will look at a case study as far as looking at one of the DATABASICS customers, which is CALIBRE, and then I will spend a few minutes and actually take you through a live environment so you can see what the application looks like, and we'll end with some questions from your guys' side. My focus today was not a big DATABASICS sales pitch, was really to kind of look overall at the marketplace and see what you should be looking at from there. Again, a lot of the features and functionalities I'll be talking about you should see with different vendors, but how those individual vendors may handle those things may differ from vendor to vendor. As we look at kind of DATABASICS, so we are headquartered in the greater Washington, D.C. area. I'm actually based in Reston, Virginia. Our primary office is here in Washington. We do also have a Canadian office to support some of our customers north of the border here, but we do actually support organizations globally. We've been providing time and expense solutions since 1997, which is really when the first web-based products came to market out there. So the product that we talk about in our history here is quite mature in the sense that we've been doing this here for about 20 years. We first started working in the Microsoft Dynamics arena back in 2003. At that point, we were approached by Microsoft as they were looking for a solution that they could focus in on government contractors. We certainly do have a good number of government contractors using this application, but today we certainly do work with organizations, whether they're tracking the projects or not, government contractors or not. We really do kind of cover all industries and verticals in the Dynamics marketplace. The application is 100% cloud-based. We made the transition from a licensed solutions to a pure cloud solution here about 7 years ago. So at this point, all delivery will take place in the cloud. And our customers are global. So we've done implementations here in the last 6 months in China, Australia, Europe. So we certainly do see customers looking globally for applications. Although again, we are based here within the U.S. and really our primary focus out there is for looking at assisting organizations as they look for a solution that can be easily configured and integrated into their overall environment out there. And there's kind of just a sampling of some of our customers out there, including Tesla, which I believe maybe one of our largest Dynamics customers out there uses us globally for expense reporting. But again, you're kind of looking at sampling there, everything from an organization like a Tesla to a retail like Panera, a brewery like Sam Adams, just a not-for-profits like Rainforest Alliance and the National Governance Association. So again, we really do kind of cover all industries and verticals as it relates to time and expense reporting. As far as the history, really if you look back, just over 20 years ago, that's really when the first web-based solutions came to market out there. Obviously, it was right when the internet was first becoming popular out there. Mostly solutions were being accessed through traditional web browser. There may have been applications that were plugins. We were typically accessing these solutions through dial-up lines. And really, the primary focus was in creating an easier way to get information from the field into the home office out there. So as the applications evolved, we started looking at integrating data such as credit card information on the expense reporting side, looking at fax machines to be able to support receipts. And again, the primary focus was to get that data from the field into the home office. Now, as the solutions moved from browser plugins to traditional web-based and 100% web-based applications, obviously the technology got better. And then as we look at kind of where that evolved to is really looking at the cloud offerings that started coming to market in the mid-2000s. Some of the organizations that kind of led that charge include organizations like Salesforce.com and others. But it's interesting because if you look at the expense and time marketplace, we really all made that jump to a pure 100% cloud-based solution here about 10 years ago, as you guys are very familiar with as you look at Microsoft and Oracle and SAP and others out there. The ERP systems are just really starting to make that push, I know, in the last couple of years. And of course, as you look at the next few years here, they will all be 100% in the cloud. But it's a move that most of the time and expense providers made years ago. In the timesheet marketplace, you still will see some solutions that will offer you a licensed product. In the expense reporting marketplace, it's very difficult to find a solution that'll still provide a license. Almost everything is cloud-based. Really, the next big jump beyond the cloud was mobile apps. I'd say sometime around 2010. Obviously, they were out before 2010, but if you look at really when these applications started to evolve on the mobile side, 2010 was the point. And really what the mobile apps gave was a new platform and some additional technologies for users to leverage. So if you look at the things like expense reporting, it gave you the ability to take pictures of receipts. On the timesheet front, it gave you the ability to start doing things like GPS locations and others. But really the mobile apps have become where almost all of our focus is when you talk to customers. Sure, they want to see the web entry, but they want to make sure that the users are also able to do everything here through the mobile devices. As you look at really where these applications are going, artificial intelligence or AI is really where everything is moving. And although that term can be used all over the place, really as it comes to time and expense reporting, the concept of AI is the ability for the application to go out and to start thinking and putting together data without the user having to put all that information together. So an example of that would be on the expense reporting front. If I simply select a date range of when I traveled, the application should be able to go out there and collect all of my credit card data, see all of my receipts within my phone, and put all that information together. On the timesheet front and the expense report front, if I enter data on a timesheet and it overlaps a date range where I'm doing an expense report, we should be able to go ahead and pick that data up. So the concept here is that if the user is simply doing little things in their daily life, that we behind the scenes will be able to go ahead and pick that information up and bring it over. So as you continue to watch where these trends go, that's what you're going to see next, is the ability for these applications to write expense reports on their own and to be pre-populating data for the end user. Ultimately, that will flow over into the administration side as well, as we're already working with using OCR to do automatic audits on the back end of the process to eliminate the need for someone in the accounting group to have to go through and do a full audit or partial audit as it relates to those pieces. But before we get to AI, let's really talk about kind of the trends, the here and now, and what we have access to right now. So I mentioned earlier, really kind of where the primary area is mobile apps. And if you look at kind of what the current technology trends and what people expect as it relates to the applications right now, is really what we call mobile apps without gaps. When mobile apps first came to the market on the time and expense front, what they were kind of light apps, or they were light versions, or they allowed you to do part of the process. The idea today, and really the expectation today, is that you should be able to do everything from beginning to end without ever touching the web browser if you so chose. So you should be able to go and enter data for a timesheet. You should be able to approve it if you're an approver. On the expense reporting front, you should be able to see credit card data. You should be able to track the projects or split allocations. And you should be able to do all that within a single solution. Again, if you look at the marketplace, you do still see some vendors that may have 2 or 3 apps in order to complete a single expense report. That really, should be cleaned up, and everything should be able to be handled through a single app, again, without gaps. On the OCR side, which is really the ability for the application to go out and read data, is in the expense reporting front. What we're looking at these days is that the ability for a user to take a picture of a receipt, for the application to read that data, and then also to be able to go out and match that data against credit card information and other areas out there. So the idea is that I can go out and simply just take that picture, put my phone away, and I can go ahead and automatically start having some of that expense report already created out there. On the HR side, and as this relates to timesheet solutions, it's really starting to integrate some of these solutions or some of these processes that were traditionally kept outside of the timesheet. So not only the ability to track leave and see that leave, but also to go out and request leave. So the ability to have within your timesheet solution an accrual module. So if I sit here today at the beginning of June, I may be taking vacation in the middle of July, but I also want to see how much vacation I may have accrued come, let's say, October. Within that mobile app, you should be able to open that up and see exactly what your accrual schedule looks like, even taking into account vacation that may be taking place between now and then. So the ability to really leverage and help the HR group, as well as to put data in the hands of the end user when he or she wants to go in and see what they may have for leave. Integration points have greatly been expanded. Obviously, today we're going to talk about how we integrate data between Dynamics and a time and expense solution. But if you go beyond the accounting platform, certainly you look at CRM as another key component for integration. But we also do integrate with banks, credit cards, travel providers, and even direct vendors these days. It's not unusual where a company will come to us and say, hey, we work with Home Depot or Lowe's or Target, and we want to be able to go in and have you automatically pick up data feeds from them and to pull that information into, in that case, the expense reporting module to clean that process up. And then really the last one is looking at GPS. For those of you that are using traditional time clocks on the timesheet front, one of you talk about kind of a current trend that really will be disruptive in the timesheet and the time clock area is the ability to do geofencing. Depending upon the type of organization, the traditional time clock will be obsolete here within the next couple of years, because what you're able to do with tablets and mobile devices is to create a fence that's based upon a geo-mapping point, and to restrict when a user can punch in or punch out. And assuming someone has their own device, they can technically walk into a warehouse, they can punch in on their phone, put their phone away, and punch out for breaks, lunch, or whenever they need to punch out. So the traditional hardware, as you look at time clocks, is going away because, again, you do have the technology out there and the ability using GPS to leverage geofencing there. And then that same GPS can also be used for expense reporting. So for those organizations that may do per diems, the application now knows where you are, so it recognizes if you're in Chicago versus Minneapolis and other areas to leverage whatever the per diem should be for meals or lodging and other areas. So this is kind of really where the current trends are. What's interesting, and this is probably one of the biggest transitions that's taken place since I've started working within this marketplace is, 17, 15 years ago, when I would walk into an organization, almost 100% the focus was on really looking at the finance and accounting group and how we were going to go out and to make their life easier. So the focus was on policy controls and supporting multiple reporting periods for timesheets and what did the workflow look like. Today, when we go into an organization, it is still critical that we are streamlining and helping the accounting group with these processes, but what we're also seeing now and what may become almost the primary focus is looking at the end user and making sure that we are putting in place a solution that is first and foremost very easy and quick for the user, that is minimizing the impact of this solution and this process on their day. So much so that we are seeing organizations sometimes make the decision to restrict some of the policies and controls they have in place in order to make life easy on the end user out there. So whereas years ago people would ask us, within the expense reporting tool, hey, can we ask this additional question? Can we get this data set and other data sets? Today, the focus is, hey, let's make life easy on the end user because the focus out there is user satisfaction. So it's a very interesting shift in that we've gone from looking at making sure the accounting group is happy, which we still do want to make them happy, to now focus on making sure that the end user is happy. So with that being said, really the focus on our development and the value offering is still on really 3 key areas. But again, we put the user at the top of that and making sure that they've got a very fast entry, they've got mobile device, and that really the effort they need to provide in is at complete minimum. Sure, we are still focused on the administration to make sure that, and the administrators to make sure that what they have is good access to data. They've got tight integration so that there's no need for them to have to manipulate or interact with the data as it flows from our application into Dynamics. And then the last piece there is on management and making sure that we can go ahead and automate the data that goes out to them. So there's the ability to automate reports and give them dashboards. And again, one of the changes is that the thought process of no longer having users go in or those that want access to reports and having to go in and actually create the report or go ahead and make a call for that report, but rather what we look to do is to push that report out to them at a predetermined basis so that they can get that data without having to go out and say, where is that out there? So again, the focus though, and probably the biggest change here as we look at this is the focus on making sure that life is easy there on the end users. Now, with that being said, I know one of the topics we talked about today is the trends as it relates to Dynamics, and DATABASICS operates as a third-party ISV here within the Dynamics environment. Certainly there are a good number of ISVs out there that provide both time as well as expense, as well as time and expense integration, as well as Dynamics provides their own solutions out there with web app and some of the other items here that they've had over the years. But these are really kind of the 5 main bullet points that when people have decided, hey, what we've seen either with web apps or other solutions, they come to us because they say this is what we're started looking for. And so the first one is the ability to go ahead and to support those requirements through configurations, not customizations. And so one of the things here is that companies expect that the applications are going to be able to meet their requirements without someone having to go out there and write code. The other area is, which kind of stems from the first one, is, they want these applications to be set up quickly. So they want to be able to do a deployment that shouldn't take 6 months to deploy, that really what they're looking at is deploy these applications in 4 to 6 weeks or so. And again, in order to do that, you can't be writing customizations. You really need to just be going out and configuring the solution. The other area is scalability and stability. Certainly, as you look at new applications out there, we continue to hear from different groups out there that as organizations grow and they have larger user groups out there, they want to make sure that the application can scale to those large user groups, it's stable, and the performance is going to meet the needs and the requirements of a large user group out there. We talked earlier about integration points. Obviously, the integration to Dynamics is critical, but typically what we find in a Dynamics environment is that you may have some other third-party tools, such as third-party solutions for payroll, like a Ceridian or an ADP or a Paychex out there. Of course, as you look at the expense reporting side, you may be typically working with a bank where you want to pull in credit card data, or someone like an American Express out there. So organizations are looking for more integration points, and they also want to make sure that that data is passing quickly and easily. And then the last one, which I know we mentioned earlier, is really talking about robust mobile apps out there. Again, we mentioned earlier mobile apps without gaps, but we are having organizations that when we go in and present to them, they'll say, you know what, we don't even want to see the web piece. Let's look at everything here on the mobile device, with the thought being that the users are only going to access these solutions here through mobile devices. So when we talk about integration with Dynamics, and that's, obviously we've been working in that Dynamics environment here for, 14, 15 years or so. What the requirements have been haven't changed too much, but it's still, sometimes we get responses from organizations when we go out and talk to them. They say, oh, you're able to do that. So I just want to kind of run through typically what you should be looking for when you're integrating a third-party tool into Dynamics. First and foremost, it's got to be a bi-directional integration. There's got to be the ability for you to set data up within Dynamics, have it flow into the time and expense system, obviously have that data flow back, and then if you do need data returns, so things like, let's say you're reimbursing an employee with an AP voucher, if you want that data to show up within the expense report, you should have that data there. If you want to have information showing up as far as other details, you should be able to get all that information not only to come out of Dynamics into the time and expense system, but then go back and then come back and forth. So the application should be able to talk bi-directionally. And then with that being said, not all of these key touch points need to have bi-directional, but again, if you look at information such as employee profiles, you should be able to set that information up in one place, have it flow over into the time and expense solution, the ability to have accounting codes and workflow, payroll, projects. So all those pieces you should be able to set up in Dynamics, and we get that question all the time where someone may be talking about a timesheet solution and they'll say, is there ability to have multi-tiered approvals? And the answer is yes. And they say, now where do we set those up? Do we set those up within DATABASICS? Do we set them up within Dynamics? And really the answer is we would prefer you set them up in Dynamics, so you set them up once, assuming, of course, the modules you have there will support that. But if you do set that up, that data will flow into our solution, and then again, it can be pushed back and forth out there. So as we look at integration, the big question as you go out and talk to vendors is, how does the data flow back and forth, and what data are you able to flow back and forth? The idea with these solutions is it shouldn't be creating any more work. It really should be eliminating work there for you. So with that, kind of summarizing, the expectations of today's solutions is, first and foremost, we've got to make these employees happy. We've got to put a tool in front of that allows them to quickly and easily enter data without being a big burden. We've got to be able to go out and provide tight integration between that third-party time and expense solution and Dynamics, as well as really whatever other solutions you may have there. I've mentioned a number of times here, of course, the mobile app should be able to do everything and do it quickly. We've got to be able to go out and automate the analytics that's going to be passed between the solution to the field, whether that's simply a report for a project manager, or it may be a report which is a little more, as you look at information such as a reconciliation report for credit cards or a utilization report out there. And then really the last piece here is looking at a platform that's going to give you open integration. Again, as we look at the focus today, it certainly is within Dynamics, but most organizations we see with these days certainly are operating and have other tools in place that may also impact what's taking place there on the time and expense side. So one of the things I want to talk about is kind of what this looks like in reality or in production. I've got a case study, and there's a much more in-depth case study on the DATABASICS website, and I can certainly share that with you guys when we send out the follow-up here for this webinar. But this case study is based upon an organization which is CALIBRE, which is headquartered here in the greater Washington, D.C. area. CALIBRE has just about 1,000 employees. They're a government contractor. And when they approached DATABASICS years ago, what they were utilizing was Dynamics XL, which they still do use, as well as ADP on the payroll front. And what they were using was an Excel process for time and expense. Now, what that Excel process did is it put in place for the users what looked like somewhat of an automated process. Obviously, a user would go in there, they could enter that data into Excel for the projects, for the hours worked, as well as for the expenses. They could then turn around and email that Excel spreadsheet, and at that point, the employee saw that their time was done. Now, most of you on this phone call will recognize that Excel certainly is not an automated process. But again, for the user, it didn't cause huge issues. But really where the issues came into play is that as a government contractor, CALIBRE is required to abide by DCAA compliance, which is basically a compliance that's put out there for defense contractors, and it really relates to controls, audits, adjustment records, and all the rest of that. And I won't get into too much detail here today, but what this Excel spreadsheet didn't have is really all the controls in place. So what we were able to provide them was a solution that had all of the audit trails and the controls that they needed in place. But the other piece about that is we also provide the ability to integrate data. So that Excel spreadsheet, although a user would enter in a project number, there was no validation to make sure that that data was actually valid or that that project number still even existed or hadn't closed in a prior period. And so what we were able to do is to provide the integration from SL, which is where they would set up their project data and billing information, and basically that data would flow back and forth between our solution and Dynamics out there. So as a user would, when we implemented our application, when a user would go into the web screen to enter in project information, it would validate it at the point of entry. It would put in place all of the controls needed, and when the user went out there to submit that timesheet or expense report, it would then automatically flow through a workflow which included multi-tiers. They also did have a semi-monthly timesheet process, and so they were looking for us to support that. And then once that data was approved, it would then all flow over into SL so they could go ahead and create reimbursements for the user, but they could also go out there and bill that time. And so the focus, of course, in the end was making sure that we still had easy use, but now we also had DCA compliance in place and that they were able to integrate the billing, the project management, HR, and payroll all into a common solution out there. And so, again, this case study with a whole lot more details available on our website, and I'm certainly happy to share that with you. I know CALIBRE has also spoken over the years at some of the Microsoft partner conferences, and they oftentimes talk a lot about not only how Dynamics has helped them with their process, but also looking at how DATABASICS has helped there from the time and expense side. So with that, I know we've talked a lot about kind of, the current trends and what's taking place out there in the market, but let's go ahead and take a look at the actual application, and we'll show you what it looks like here in real life here. So I've already logged into the DATABASICS offering, and I won't take too much time here this morning going through this, but what I want to do is just kind of show you some of the areas that the people are looking for within the application to support that process and how it operates. So we're looking at the web experience. I talked a lot about mobile today, and due to my PC setup here, I'm not able to kind of show you the mobile view, but we'd be happy at a different point to show you guys what the mobile view looks like. And as a follow-up, I can even send you over screenshots. But again, as you look at this application, as the user logs in, there's a number of areas that he or she's able to see. First and foremost, they're able to very quickly come in and see what their existing leave balance looks like. So we talked about accruals out there. And again, the user would be able to see this on their mobile device. But what I'm able to see is come out here is I can come out and see right now that I had 16 hours approved of vacation for the week of 4th of July. I've also asked for 8 hours off this first part of September. And what you're able to see is how my balance is, first off, being deducted as those hours were taken, but then also I can see how the hours continue to accrue as I look through the end of 2017. So this is just a quick view for the user to be able to see what their leave balance looks like. As well, if I wanted to, I could come in here and request leave moving forward. The other component here within this application, as the user sits here, this is also where we're going to be able to go out and do our expense reports as well as our timesheets. But on the expense reporting side, what this user is able to see is I can come in here and see within this web view my receipt library. So these receipts, and this is a Panera receipt, these are receipts that I've taken pictures with my mobile device. So if I decided not to use my mobile to submit my expense report, I can very quickly come in here into the web experience and I can see a complete library of all the receipts that I've had captured since I've been traveling here over the last few weeks. Now these receipts, some of them you will notice are pictures that I've taken, for example this Panera one. Other ones are going to be, for example this Hertz, is I had automatically sent into the expense environment. Or in this case, this Delta one, I actually, with an email, I actually forward over into the environment. So we do have the ability to have a repository that sits out there for those receipts. And what I'll show you here in just a second is how we get that data into the application. Other items that I'm able to do within this application is I can get to reporting, I can do proxy entry, and as well, we were talking earlier about some of the new technologies in the timesheet side. I can also clock in and clock out if I needed to. But first, before we go look at the timesheet function, let's go ahead and look at what the expense offering looks like. And again, some of the new technology you should see. So I've got this trip to Washington that's currently on hold. We're going to go ahead and add some expense transactions to that trip. Now, as I open up this expense report, if we were to be talking here 5 years ago, the way a user would come in here to enter an expense is I would come over here, I would pick out an expense, let's just say this car rental, and I would come in here and I would enter this data. So I would say I had a car rental on the 5th of June. I would say it was for $125.25. And I could basically go through and enter data related to that. I'd have to come in here and add the receipts in other areas. What has changed these days and what the new technologies allow us to do is I can actually start this expense report looking primarily at my receipt library. So I mentioned earlier, and as we open this up, you see here that I have receipts. If I want to go ahead and add this receipt and to have our application auto-create a transaction line item for me, all I simply do is I open this up, I say, you know what, let's add this to this expense report. And what you'll see here is the application read the data, so it read the date of the transaction, it picked up the vendor, it picked up the amount, all of that receipt, even though it's laying on its side. And then it's going to ask me, I still need to go ahead and say, you know, what the meal was or what the expense type was, so I'll say it's meals. And then I went ahead and dropped this over into the expense report. And so what you'll see now is where the prior one I entered what we would say manually. In this case, what I had was it came in here, it picked up the receipt, it auto-created the line item, and what it also does is it gives me the ability to allocate this against a project, a cost center, or a department, and to split those details. So the technology is out there these days now where a user really does not need to go in there and manually enter data. If I've got here's an Uber receipt, again, I jumped out of the car, Uber sent me a receipt, I forwarded that receipt into this library, and what you'll see now is that it's going to read that data right off the receipt. In this case, it auto-populated because we recognize Uber should be a taxi or a cab, and so it pulled that data over, and in that case, automatically dropped into the report out there. So the technology continues to advance out there to really streamline the process on the expense reporting front. And again, if I was here on my mobile device, I could do all of these things. Now, the other piece, and a lot of you are probably familiar with credit card transactions, which is another process that really streamlines the process for the user. So in this case, here's a list of credit card transactions that I can go ahead and drop over into my expense report. You'll notice at the top of the screen, there's one here for this Delta transaction for a trip for $325.20. Again, if I come back to that receipt imaging process, here's this Delta trip. What I can do is I don't need to go to that credit card queue to add it to my expense report. I simply, again, come in here. I tell the application to go ahead and OCR this Delta transaction. We're going to pick that data up. We're going to also, in this case, it's going to recognize that data was sitting in the credit card queue. So there's my credit card transaction being matched. And then I'm going to go ahead. It recognizes that's airfare. And then I'm going to simply add that over into my expense report. So in this case, this Delta transaction was actually company paid, so if you look at some of the totals over here on the left, that $325 was being pulled out of what's being reimbursed to me. But again, all the receipts and all the data show up there. To take that data one step further, for those of you that are interested in travel data, here is an integration to a third-party travel management company, and not only do I see the data related to that Delta transaction, but I now also see departure airport, arrival airport, and all the rest. So really what we're focusing on, there's a lot of other areas here within this expense report that we can talk about today, but what I wanted to focus on was some of those newer technologies and how they're really helping to streamline the user. So again, if we were to be talking 10 years ago, and I were to be showing you how to create an expense report, there would have been a lot of data entered by the end user. I would have said, okay, here's my Hertz receipt. It cost $125.25. Now I'm going to go out to the fax machine and fax that receipt in. Today, with mobile devices, OCR, and the ability to match that data, you saw that I was able to basically add those last 3 transactions by simply looking at what was a picture and adding those over into the expense report. So you can see how quickly a user should be able to go out there and to create and complete an expense report by simply being able to go out there and just simply take pictures as that takes place. So on the expense reporting front, again, the mobile apps, the OCR, and the integration points are what's critical to really make life easy on the end user. Now, once I go ahead and submit this expense report on, it's going to go off into an approval process, and this solution will do multi-tiered approval, so you can have as many or as few people approve it as you need. But what I'm also going to do is go over here and start look at the timesheets real fast as we look at that. So I mentioned earlier, again, some of the newer technologies is the ability to punch in, punch out. So if I were to actually be a user that needed to punch in and punch out, you'll see right here I have the ability to go ahead and to clock in and clock out through this web view. Again, you're not going to see any geofencing here, but if I were on my mobile device, it would recognize where the user was actually punching that time in and punching it out. But for now, let me go ahead here and just open up a timesheet just for a second to show you kind of what the look and feel looks like these days within these products here. And what you're seeing here is that today is June 7th. I've got my timesheet completed here for the prior week. But again, what we have is a process that makes it very easy for the user to simply come in here and enter data as it relates to their day. There's the ability for us to go ahead and to have built-in audit trails and other information out there. And again, you're going to see the ability for the solution to go out there and to recognize winter holidays and all the rest out there. So for the user, when he or she opens up the timesheet or the expense report, that data should be very quickly and easily entered into the application, so the user has a very quick and easy process out there. And again, from this timesheet side, I'll go ahead and place this timesheet on hold as it relates to that data. And then really kind of the last piece of this process here is as we look at the approvals, and I'm just going to log out for just a quick second and log in as a new user. And I'm going to come in here to a time approval for a second because I want to show you one item here. Give me just a second here. But as we come in from the approval side, what you'll also see here is the ability for a manager to very quickly and easily get to this data. So again, if they were to look at from the expense reporting side, what you will see is I can come in here, I can see this data, so I can see all that information, including those receipts. I can set that Uber information, and again, I can put all this information on a single screen. I can put on 2 screens, and if you were to be looking at this from the mobile devices, you also have the ability to go out there and to approve, reject, and see all that information there within those mobile views. So as we look at these solutions out here, really the primary focus, again, continues to be on making sure that we're going to provide something that's very clean, simple, and easy, and yet still make sure we capture all the data as it relates to the user. And then really the last thing here we'll talk about here is looking at information from the administration side. I won't spend too much time here looking at this piece, but did want to open this up and just kind of show you what these views look like, because again, we talked earlier about access to information, and what you're seeing here is going to be some dashboard views out there. So as a administrator or manager logs in, he or she can see information as it relates to individual expenses. They can see charts and graphs as it relates to information. And then again, we can see access to how many expense reports are currently in the approval process, and what this person is going to be able to do is actually drill in directly through that pie chart, and it's going to take them to where they can get to information. And again, here's just going to be the 11 expense reports that are sitting out there waiting to be approved. So with that, again, didn't want to spend too much time today talking about really the, from the application perspective. But what, again, wanted to thank you guys for taking the time and sitting in here this morning. I do have some time here to talk about some of the, talk about some of the questions. There we go. Whoops, I was losing. Let's see if I can get my PowerPoint back up. There we go. But did have a few minutes today to answer some questions as it relates to time and expense. So if, and again, Jason and I can certainly answer or take those on. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A box, and I will start answering questions.
Thanks, Chris. And I think we did lose your screen share, so if you want to bring up a final slide or something, I think you have to restart that. But while you do that, we do have some questions, and one of them that came in is, regarding timesheets, can an approver edit certain parts of a timesheet, like just project or task correction?
Yes.
All right, and your slide's back up.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why I lost that there. So yes, you have the ability to do partial approvals of a timesheet. So probably one of the most common ones we hear is, let's say we've got a timesheet and you've got multiple projects being worked and multiple project managers, and yet you may want the project manager to see what the employee has done for the week or the biweekly period, but not necessarily to approve someone else's project. And so yes, you do have the ability to go out there and to do a partial approval of the timesheet if you want. Same thing would go on the expense reporting side as well. So if you have someone that got approval for just certain items, let's say someone has to approve just part of airplane tickets that are greater than $1,000, you can have a partial approval out there.
All right. We use about 10 time banks. Is that supported by your system?
I'm sorry, what was it? You said 10 time? I'm sorry, what was the...
The term was time banks, 10 time banks.
Okay. Oh, yes. So yes, it certainly would. I would say on banks, yes, you have the ability to certainly support that. That's not an issue. It would be standard functionality.
All right. Another question. Can work time be entered for clocking in and out by landline in a home?
Yes, so we would certainly, so really as long as we have access to the web, so whether that's being through a landline or even through a mobile device, but certainly yes. So I mean, as you look at those devices, we just need some sort of connectivity. A landline is just fine, but what it will do is it certainly will, I was kind of talking about geofencing earlier, but if one of the concerns is making sure they are punching in from home, it will actually capture where that punch in and punch out took place.
And was the currency from the bill determined by the GPS location?
Great question. So there is the ability to do that. So as we look at the currencies, and we didn't talk much about currencies there within the solution. So we can use the GPS location to recognize where obviously where the user is. And so we can use that to do a number of things that relate to the location. The most common one, which I did mention, is things like per diem. So we can recognize that, again, if the person's in Cologne, Germany versus Chicago, Illinois, how does that take place? We can use it for localization of currency. And if you're using that for billings as well, we can certainly do that. But the solution will give you the ability to recognize basically a local currency versus a home currency versus a work currency and the rest. But no, that certainly is capable here within the solution.
Okay. Is the integration with Dynamics real time?
So yes, so basically we have an integration utility, and again, this is something you're going to see within the Dynamics marketplace, and I know there are third-party tools out there like Scribe and others that will provide integration pieces. So as it relates to DATABASICS, and again, I can kind of make this a blanket statement for a lot of T&E providers, everyone kind of does it, not say it does it differently, but everyone kind of has their own process out there. If needed, we can do web service calls, which is basically, real time out there. So if you set an employee up, it's going to then be set up in our system. We can also do integration through secure file transfers, which won't be real-time, but it'll be near real-time. So it really depends on the individual customer, depends upon the volume of projects and employee data and other information. But it's really, once again, the short answer is it's close, and it really depends on the customer and how they want that integration to take place. We do have our API that we use for both pushing and pulling data from our solution. But again, that's something we would go through with the individual customer as far as how that works.
Okay, and maybe a related question here, but in terms of which Dynamics products DataBasics does integrate with, so someone's asking, does it integrate with GP versions? Does it integrate with the 365 Business Edition specifically?
Yeah. So at this point, the only one we really don't ever integrate with much often is Dynamics CRM, which is just because I mentioned earlier that we do see companies looking for CRM integration. It's asked, but it's not frequent. But as you look at GP, SL, NAV, AX, and then you look at all the different versions of them, because that's a question we get all the time. Yes, the short answer is yes, we integrate with those. So what we've seen is even as let's just take, for example, GP or SL, as they continue to evolve, the way we integrate data, and the question isn't always do we integrate today, but the question is what happens when those applications get upgraded? How does that impact the interface that's already pre-built? And what we typically see is that on the back end, as you look at those products, those interfaces, once they're built, when the solution is upgraded, it typically nothing's taking place or nothing's changing as it relates to the integration piece. There may be new fields added into Dynamics, so there's an opportunity for us to pick up additional data, but it's not really changing that. Now, obviously, if you're using GP now in a license model and you're going to move to 365, some things change there because now you're basically changing where those touch points are. But once you make that transition, at that point moving forward, you're not going to see anything change. But that is something that we are obviously seeing these days. There's a lot more of the 365 customers out there. But no, we work really across platforms. And really what we do on the integration side is just sit down with the customer, see what data they're trying to use, and set that mapping up so that the data is going to flow back and forth.
All right. Do you have a solution which can be used in non-connected internet remote areas?
Yeah, so another good question. So we do not today. We used to. We were talking earlier, I was talking about kind of the history out there. Offline versions were very popular years ago, especially when even dial-up was struggled. I mean, as all of us can remember, the original and the early web solutions. We had an offline version that we sunset about 5 years ago. Because even then the argument used to be, or people used to say, well, what about being on airplanes and other areas? And the truth is that we see connectivity is just available. We've got a number of USAID customers out there, and so these are folks that are doing business in parts of the world that are underdeveloped, and then that's really where they're doing business. And even in those instances, we still see that the users are able to get to points where they have access to data, or I should say access to connectivity, to be able to submit both time and expense. So at this point, we don't have a product. I do know there are some out there, but again, really from our use and what we've seen out there is that really it's just the world is so well connected these days that we haven't seen much use for those offline products.
Okay, someone wants to know, do you have a GP case study or case studies to share with prospects?
Yeah, we can certainly. I don't think we've got a formal one the way we've got one here for CALIBRE and the SL side, but we certainly can share. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, so if you look at kind of the DataBasics, we do work outside of Dynamics, but about 55% of our business are Dynamics customers out there. And if you were to kind of break that number down, so if you were to look at that, take that 55% and make it a whole one. SL and GP are by far the two largest percentages of our customer base as it relates to Dynamics. We've got a good number of NAV and a good number of AX, but the GP and SL guys are certainly probably the largest percentage out there. If you want to reach back out to me, my email address is here, or you can even reach out to DataBasics generically. We'd be happy to provide you some references and some additional details for a GP customer.
How is an expense incurred in multiple currency, how is an expense that is incurred in multiple currencies converted to an employee's local currency?
Yeah, so there's a couple different components there. So within our application, every user has a default currency. So let's take, for example, myself, let's say I'm a U.S. employee, I'm going to be paid in U.S. dollars. If I travel to Canada, couple things there. If I'm using a corporate credit card, oftentimes that corporate credit, or not oftentimes, always that corporate credit card, if I use that in Canada, let's take, for example, my American Express. What it's going to do is the American Express is going to convert that from Canadian dollars to U.S. dollars based upon the transaction date. And so when it shows up in my expense report, it's going to show this Canadian dollar or U.S. dollars. Now, the other question is, what if I go out and I spend Canadian dollars, on the street or out of pocket? In that case, we have a feed with Owanda, which actually loads automatically into our application. And so if I were to pay for something out of pocket on the street in Canada, what it would do is when I enter that data into the application, it's going to do the currency conversion for the user. It'll look at the date of the transaction. So let's say I was there last Tuesday. It'll go in and say Canadian dollars was at X exchange rate. This is what it converted over to U.S. dollars, and it would pull that in. Now, I assume looking at kind of some of the attendees on this call, the other component to that is what if I was doing time or expense or I was billing against a project? Within our solution, we do also have a currency tied to a project. So it's possible that, I could be in Canada working on a Canadian project that may be billed in Canadian dollars, but I need to be reimbursed in U.S. dollars. That is part of the global component of our solution that all of that would be picked up. But to answer the earlier question, we do have a currency feed that loads into the application to account for any of the transactions that do need to run off that or to have basically an out-of-pocket calculation.
All right. Someone just wants to know where your Canadian office is.
Montreal. Right. If you want to get more specific than that, I would have to get back to you. But it's in Montreal.
We enter expenses first against projects in Autotask, then integrate that into GP. Any integration with Autotask?
Yeah, so certainly. So as we look at that, and I was talking about integration today, and of course I know that the primary focus here is on the Dynamics community. But certainly as we go out and talk to organizations, there's a lot of different sources that they use. I mean, the idea is, and that's why there is such a large ISV environment in the Dynamics area, is the idea is to put that, build your own ecosystem if you need to. And so we pick projects up from numerous areas out there, including a lot of companies do have some sort of homegrown systems. So it's so the short answer is yes. We can certainly pick data up from other areas and pull that over into our solution.
All right. Well, let me make a final call for questions here. We just have one left in the queue, and then we'll probably start wrapping up unless I see any others come in. Does DataBasics have a reseller program for VARs?
Yes, we do. So please feel free. Again, I'm probably the best point of contact for you. So we do have a reseller program out there for VARs. And again, I can provide plenty of details. On those. And again, we will be, as you look at Microsoft Dynamics, again, you can always reach out to us directly, but we will, as we approach the fall, we will be attending the number of different Dynamics events, which are customer-related and partner-related. So we're also happy to talk to you guys at that point as well.
All right, well, we'll begin wrapping up here. I want to remind everyone on the call that there is a very brief survey that will pop up after the event, and it's just a chance to give a little bit of extra feedback to us and to Chris and the DataBasics team about your experience today. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to present and for taking all these questions.
Oh, well, thank you guys for giving us time here this morning. And again, my contact details are there as well as the generic DataBasics access. So, please feel free to reach out to me if there's any additional information I can provide or help you guys with.
Very good. Well, with that, we will end today's event. Have a great day, everybody.